what were your strategies in terms of investment, and is it going to be changed from the QE3?
No, I mean obviously all of the investing that we do would be, I guess you would describe it as quite opportunistic and certainly not long term.
Okay.
And so an awful lot of the patterns that our managers look for, a lot of the opportunities that our managers look for, wouldn't be necessarily influenced negatively or positively by QE3, and really wouldn't be based around QE3 in and of itself. So I think that perhaps a fund manager who's taking a much longer term view would shape their strategy accordingly, but our managers wouldn't invest in that way. Much of what our managers do is on a very short term basis.
Right.
I also think also that the overall trends that we've seen in the market over the last 6 or 7 months is a continued anticipation not just of QE3 but of what happened in Europe and the stimulus coming out of China also. So I think there is an understanding from many market participants that fiscal policy just isn't getting there, and so monetary policy has to take over to a certain extent.
Right.
The big problem that all of these places have, with the exception of Asia, is unemployment. And so no matter what government policy is adopted, either by the European governments or by the American government, they just don't seem to be able to do anything about unemployment. And I think the QE3 was a very direct response to that.
Right, right. So could you say that the big event, I mean like the global event, for example, like ECB decisions, Fed's decision, or also the Chinese government's decision, would not affect at all to your investment strategies?
No.
Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. Our investment strategies stay intact regardless of what the macro environment is. So most of our managers operate on, I guess you could think of it as a reactionary basis, rather than being grand prognosticators. This is something that we were talking about earlier on today in one of our meetings, that being a very good fund manager or investment manager, it's not about making big calls and getting all the big calls correct. It's about putting yourself in a position whereby you can turn a success ratio of maybe 60% into long-term gains. So a good investment manager will accept that they'll get it wrong 40% of the time, but through good risk management they can turn that 60-40 edge into long-term profits for their clientele.
But we could see the volatility in many asset class, like bond market, equity markets, and also the gold or commodities prices last night, also today. So what are the reasons that we could, we should invest in the hedge funds and like?
Well, I think that the right hedge funds have shown the ability over a very long period of time to generate returns. Clearly there's, like any industry, there are mediocre hedge funds, and there are outright bad hedge funds, and there are very good hedge funds. We'd like to think that we work with the good ones. And the firms that we use would have track records to back up that fact. I think what's very important for us as an investor, or any investor for that matter, is that decisions need to be made over observation of very long periods of time. So any 6 months or 9 months or 12 months is very short in observing either an asset class or a fund manager. I think what's very difficult for retail investors to understand sometimes is that it's the role of the fund manager not to react excessively to what's happened over the last 5 or 6 months. Rather, the fund managers that we use have shown a clear ability to make money over 5, 10, 15 years. So money management is a craft that plays itself out over very long periods of time. It cannot be measured in sound bites of 3 months or 6 months. It has to be measured in much longer periods than that.
So should we invest in hedge fund now? Is it a good time now?
Well, it sounds like a very cliched thing to say, but it's always a good time to invest in a skilled manager. So once you find a manager that you feel has skill, we don't think that you should try and time them. So timing of hedge fund investments, like the timing of many investments, is notoriously difficult. Certainly we think that there's very little predictability in the short term of how a particular hedge fund is going to do. And we're not really concerned about how they do in the short term. We're much more interested in how they're going to do over 5 or 10 years for our clients. So to answer your question, it's never a good time or a bad time. Once you find a good hedge fund manager, that's something that you want to get involved in.